Good day. If there has been one constant in international affairs over the last 10 or indeed 20 years, it is the implacable hostility of Britain and its governments, both Labour and Conservative, towards Russia, and in particular towards the Russian president, Vladimir Putin. Anybody who is familiar with the British media knows that it actually surpasses in its hostility to Russia even the worst excesses of the British and German medias. There is no more outspoken criticism of Russia anywhere on earth than what you will find in the pages of The Guardian and Financial Times newspapers, and the Daily Telegraph and the Times, the two other big broadsheets in Britain, which are read by the British political class, follow shortly behind. The BBC also, though in perhaps slightly more measured language, can be reliably expected to take strong anti-Russian line on nearly all international questions. In the major foreign policy venues of the West, Britain has also always and consistently been a strong advocate of strong opposition to Russia. The British can reliably speak out against Russia at the G7 summits, at NATO summit meetings, at EU Council meetings when Britain was a member of the EU, and in all sorts of other forums around the world. The British, for example, have also been strong, indeed even vehement advocates of the need to disconnect Russia from SWIFT, and it is known that David Cameron's government advocated precisely that in 2014 at the time of the peak of the Ukrainian crisis in that year. So this has been a settled pattern of British-Russian relations now for some time, and it has led to an almost total collapse of contacts between Britain and Russia. As a British citizen, indeed someone with a very powerful and strong attachment to my home country, I have long been disquieted by this. Firstly, I should say that I find the intensity of British hostility to Russia not only difficult to understand, but also entirely self-defeating. It seems to me that all it has achieved is to isolate Britain from the flow of international diplomacy, a great part of which, after all, passes through Moscow, which remains the capital of one of the world's great powers. The British, by insisting on pursuing this eccentric, even quixotic campaign against the Russians, are unable to speak to the Russians in an intelligible way, and as a result they have been cut out of the diplomacy relating to such topics as Ukraine, Syria, arms control, and all the rest. It is also the case that British ministers now barely ever speak to Russian ministers. It's ages since an important Russian official visited London to hold consultations with the British government, and the last time a British diplomat or foreign or minister visited Moscow, that was Boris Johnson when he was foreign secretary. The result was a total debacle. Well, it seems to me that recent events with the Biden-Putin summit in Geneva may be starting to bring home to the British the folly of this policy and the extent to which it is leading Britain into isolation. There must have been many facts about this summit meeting in Geneva that the British found disquieting. After all, it is now clear that all of the top issues that are so dear to the British are being filed away by the Americans in the bottom drawer as they seek at least some sort of tentative rapprochement with Moscow. For example, it's now clear that the issue of Ukraine's NATO membership, something fervidly advocated by the British going all the way back to the Bucharest summit meeting in 2008, has now, to all intents and purposes, been shelved. At his press conference in Cornwall, President Biden of the United States gave further credence to my belief, discussed in programs on this channel, that the United States is looking for ways to pull out of Syria and to end its involvement in that war there. The United States has also announced its intention of pulling out of Afghanistan and appears to be engaged in a dialogue with Russia over that particular issue. And perhaps of greatest concern to the British of all is the fact that the Americans have dropped their opposition to the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, which now looks like it will be completed. And it seems that the topic of the two sets of poisonings in Britain, the Litvinenko polonium poisoning of 2006 and the very bizarre Skripal-Novichok poisoning of 2018, were not discussed at the Geneva summit between Biden and Putin at all. The latter must be for the British a particularly alarming development, because they have tried to use the Skripal affair in order to try to isolate Russia in international forums and in international diplomacy by implying that Russia is in violation of its obligations under the Chemical Weapons Convention. So the British, much to their dismay, are sensing that the tectonic plates are starting to shift, and they're starting to shift in a way that they don't like, towards a rapprochement between Washington and Moscow. And they're also beginning to find that the Germans also, that other key European power, look increasingly likely to want to improve their relations with Moscow once the September elections in Germany are out of the way. It's now becoming increasingly clear that what looks like the dominant party in Germany, the CDU, after the September elections, will seek an improvement of relations with Russia, with this being very much the goal of the likely future Chancellor of Germany, Armin Laschet. The Green Party, by contrast, the party which in Germany stands for confrontation with Russia, appears for the moment at least to be losing ground. So the British now, I think, for the first time sense the practical reality. Their two key allies, the United States and Germany, are starting to adjust their policies towards an improvement of relations with Russia. And of course, France has always been skeptical about the confrontation with Russia right from the outset. And this has become increasingly articulated in various clever statements by the French President Emmanuel Macron. And so the British, far from isolating the Russians, now perhaps are starting to sense that it may instead be they who are isolated, that the situations in Ukraine and Syria and Afghanistan may be resolved, with the Russians playing a central role, but with the British relegated to the audience. Well, that may explain a decision on 17th June by the British Foreign Minister, Dominic Raab, to actually telephone the Russians and to speak to Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov. The reason, by the way, I just refer to him as David Raab is because, rather bizarrely, the Russian Foreign Ministry readout refers to him as David Raab instead of by his correct name. I wonder whether that is intentional and whether that might have been a studied comment from the Russians about Britain's relative lack of importance. But regardless, it was clear from the Russian foreign minister's readout that it was Raab who telephoned Moscow, and that the Russians gave him a very tough reception indeed. I'm going to read out the entire readout so that one can get a flavour from it of the nature of the conversation which took place. On June 17th, at the initiative of the British side, a telephone conversation took place between Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Russian Federation, Sergei Lavrov, and Minister for Foreign Affairs, Commonwealth and Development of Great Britain, David Raab. By the way, he's not the Minister for Foreign Affairs, he's the Secretary of State for Foreign Affairs, a fact that the Russians probably also know. But anyway, I digress, and I shall proceed with the readout. During the conversation, the unsatisfactory state of bilateral relations was stated, the responsibility for which lies entirely with London. The Russian side emphasised the importance of British officials' refusal of unfounded accusations and provocative rhetoric in interstate dialogue that were not backed up by a single fact, and that there is no alternative to returning London to the channel of respectful and equal communication. The selective nature of contacts practiced by the British only on those issues that are of interest to Great Britain is unacceptable in normal diplomatic practice. The problem of London's unconstructive actions is sharpened as a result of which the activities of Russian diplomatic institutions in Great Britain are seriously hampered, which of course causes Moscow's immediate response. Sergei Lavrov called for cleaning up this rubble on a mutual basis. During the exchange of views on international issues, the emphasis was placed on the problems of the JCPOA, the situation around Belarus and Ukraine. When discussing the Belarusian theme, Sergei Lavrov pointed out the immutability of refusing external interference in the internal affairs of Belarus, as well as using the language of sanctions and threats in relations with Minsk. In connection with the topic unfoundedly promoted by the West about alleged violations by Moscow of the Convention on the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, the real situation begins with the actions of the West, which grossly violates this convention, subjecting the Technical Secretariat of the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, undermining the universal principle of its activities. The two sides also exchanged views on cooperation in combating the pandemic and global climate change. Sergei Lavrov called on the British side to exercise responsible cooperation based on mutual consideration of interests as well as concrete actions to form a positive agenda in Russian-British interaction. It was agreed to solemnly celebrate the 80th anniversary of the arrival of the first northern convoy from Great Britain to the USSR during the Second World War. Well, I have never read a readout of a telephone conversation between foreign ministers that is as harsh as this. If Dominic Raab was hoping to lecture the Russians, what he seems to have got is a full rap, not so much on the wrist, but on the crown of the head. In fact, Lavrov seems to have thrown absolutely everything at him, making it absolutely clear to Raab that if Britain is seriously interested in improving relations with Russia, then it will have to fundamentally change its entire foreign policy orientation towards Russia, and that the Russians, for their part, are not willing to give an inch on any issue. Well, That is what comes from pursuing a policy of confrontation which one does not have by oneself the strength to see through. Britain is not the United States. To a certain extent, the United States can try to lecture Moscow, though increasingly the Russians push back. But Britain certainly cannot, not at any level. Moreover, its attempts to do so risk leaving it isolated if its allies, the United States and Germany first and foremost, but France to a great extent also, look like changing their positions with respect to Russia. It cannot have been an easy conversation for Raab. Whether he is prepared to change the entire orientation of British policy, I don't know. I think it is extremely unlikely, given the extent to which hostility to Russia has now become hardwired at every level of the British political establishment. I've noticed, for example, the extremely tepid and low-key coverage of the Geneva summit in the British media. As of the time of writing, as of the time of making of this video, the Guardian, perhaps the most vehement anti-Russian newspaper in Britain of them all, has failed to editorialize about the Geneva summit as if it is an event too horrible and too difficult to explain to actually cover. That gives one some idea of how entrenched hostility to Russia in Britain has become. The British need quickly and urgently to adjust their policies, and I hope the time has come for them to do precisely that. Thank you very much for joining me for this program on this channel. I hope you can join me in future programs, both on this channel and on our main channel, The Duran, where I do programs with my colleague and friend, Alex Christoforou. Please also join us on our other platforms, BitChute, Odyssey, SuperU, and Locals. And please, to the extent that you can, support us via PayPal, Patreon, and Subscribestar. Last but not least, don't forget to go to our shop, buy the amazing things that you will find there, our magic mugs, our hats, our hoodies, our sweatshirts, our t-shirts, and all the rest. And last but not least, please check your subscription to this channel and please tick the like button to this video if you have, of course, liked it. Thank you very much for joining me today. Have a wonderful day, and I look forward to you joining me again soon.